It is the last evening of September, 700 years ago, and you are walking up a long chalk road toward a castle. You can smell wood smoke and wet grass, and somewhere below the walls, apples going soft in an orchard. The harvest carts have been creaking through the gate all day, and the ruts they cut in the road are deep enough to hold the last of the light. The light goes early now. The year is turning. This is the border country, the Welsh marches, where England leans against the hills of Wales. The wars here are over, at least for now. The castle on the hill above you is not expecting anyone tonight. Its gates will close at dusk, the way they close every dusk, without hurry and without fear, because closing the gate is simply one of the things the evening does. Behind those walls live perhaps 80 people. A steward is closing his account rolls by candlelight because tomorrow is Michaelmas, and Michaelmas is when the year is counted. A smith is banking his forge down to embers. A watchman is climbing the stair to the wall, breathing on his hands. So dim the lights. Get comfortable. There's no hurry here. There is nowhere you need to be for a whole year. The people of this castle do not measure the year in numbers. Almost no one here could tell you what number the year is, and no one needs to. They measure it in feasts. Michaelmas, Martinmas, Candlemas, Lammas. Each one is a door the year passes through, and on the far side of each door the light is different, the food is different, the work is different. We are going to stay here, inside these walls, from this Michaelmas all the way around to the next one. A whole year, slowly. And if slow years in old stone are the kind of thing that helps you sleep, you can subscribe, quietly, somewhere along the way. But there's no rush about that either. Nothing here moves faster than an ox. Come up the last of the road now. The gate is still open. The first person you meet in any castle is the porter. His name is Mardog. He is an old man with a face like the bark of an oak, and he has kept this gate for longer than anyone can remember, through the wars, through 2 lords, through more winters than he will admit to. His whole world is this archway, the great doors, the bar of oak that drops behind them, the small wicket gate cut into the larger one, so that a single traveler can be let in without opening the whole mouth of the castle. There is a rule about porters, and it is written down in the customs of the great houses of this age in almost these words. The porter must always spend the night at the gate. Always. His bed is in the thickness of the wall itself, a wooden box of a bed in a stone alcove, close enough that he can hear a knock in his sleep. A castle is a thing with one mouth, and the porter sleeps inside it. He nods you through because tonight is a night for coming in. Everything is coming in. Sacks and barrels and carts, geese complaining in their wicker crates, the last hay of the year riding high and swaying. The courtyard smells of straw and smoke and animals, a warm smell, a full barn smell, the smell of a place that has just finished feeding itself for the winter. Tomorrow is the feast of Saint Michael the Archangel, Michaelmas, the 29th of September, and to understand this castle, to understand this whole world, you have to understand what Michaelmas is. It is New Year's Day, not the new year of the calendar, but the new year of the land, which is the only one that matters here. England runs on 4 days: Lady Day at the end of March, midsummer at the end of June, Michaelmas at the end of September, and Christmas. The quarter days. Rents come due on the quarter days. Debts are paid or carried over on the quarter days. Servants are hired from one quarter day to the next. If you borrow money, if you lease a field, if you take on an apprentice, the agreement lives between those 4 fixed posts of the year. And of the 4, Michaelmas is the deepest, because Michaelmas is when the harvest is finally, completely in, and so it is the only moment when a farm can honestly be counted. How much grain came in, how much is owed, what the year was worth. The old farming year ends at Michaelmas, and the new one begins the next morning, and there is no gap between them at all. Which is why tonight, in a small room off the Great Hall, the steward is still awake. His name is Walter. He is a careful man with ink on the side of his hand, and spread in front of him is the account of the year, not a book, but a roll. Strips of parchment stitched end to end, wound up like a scroll, one line of writing for every day. This is how a great household keeps its memory. Somewhere in a chest, there are rolls like this one going back years, a shelf of tightly wound years. We still have rolls like Walter's, real ones. From a great lady's household in these very decades, a roll survives that wrote down every single day, where the household slept, what it spent, what it ate, who arrived. We know that house bought 2 chamber pots for 1.50. We know it bought new tablecloths for 7p. We know the names of its messengers, and we will meet one of them later in the year. That is what a castle is, underneath the stone. It is a household that writes everything down. Walter's candle is burning low, and he lets it. Tomorrow the reckoning will be read, and the roll of this year will be wound up and put away in the chest, and a new strip of clean parchment will be stitched on, and the whole slow wheel will begin again. The roll knows this house better than any person does. It knows that shoes for a servant cost 4.5 the pair. It knows the day the barber came and what his horse hire cost. It knows every guest by the extra loaves they ate. Long after every voice in this castle has gone quiet, rolls like this one will still be talking, patiently, in ink the color of rust, to anyone who will listen. Nearly everything I am telling you tonight, a roll told someone first. Blow out the flame, Walter. It will keep until morning. Supper that Michaelmas Eve is laid in the great hall, and the hall, you will find, is not just a room. It is a diagram of the world drawn in tables. At the far end, on a low platform, the high table stands sideways to everyone else. The Lord's place, empty tonight, he is at another of his manors, the lady's place, the chaplain, the steward standing in for the family. Down the length of the hall run the long boards on their trestles, and along them the entire household in strict and comfortable order. The officers nearest the platform, then the grooms, then the kitchen boys, down and down to the humblest scullion by the draughty door. Somewhere along that line stands the great silver salt cellar, and the old phrase still lives in your language because of tables like this one. Above the salt, the honored. Below the salt, everyone else. No one has to be told where to sit. Everyone in this room has known their place at tables since before they could reach it. And yet look, it is one room, one fire, one roof, one smell of pottage and bread for all of them. The lord of this age eats in front of his whole household, from the constable to the gooseboy, and this is on purpose. A household is a family in the old, wide sense of the word, and this hall is where the family proves, nightly, that it is one. The pottage goes around, the loaves are broken, the day's small news travels up and down the boards at the speed of ale. At the end, what is left, and custom makes sure something is left, goes into the alms tub at the door for the poor who will come to the gate tomorrow. In a good house, the leftovers are part of the budget too. Walter counts them in his head, and the almoner counts them at the gate, and heaven, presumably, counts them somewhere as well. Before bed, some of the household drift into the castle's smallest room. The chapel, one bay of stone, 2 good wax candles, a painted ceiling of stars that has gone smoke-dim over the years. It is worth learning, tonight, how this world tells time. There is no clock in this castle. The great mechanical clocks are only just being invented in this decade, in a few cathedral towers far from here. A baron's castle keeps time the way it has always been kept, by bells, and the bells follow the church's hours. Prime at sunrise, terce mid-morning, sext at noon, none in the afternoon, vespers as the light fails, and compline, the day's soft final word before sleep. In the abbeys, monks rise in the black middle of the night for matins as well. A castle chapel is gentler with its household and mostly lets them sleep till prime. No one here says 7 o'clock. They say by prime, toward vespers, after compline. The day is not a number line, It is a rosary of bells, and the beads are wider apart in winter and closer in summer because the hours themselves stretch and shrink with the daylight. Time here is not something you spend. It is something you stand inside of, like weather. The chaplain says Compline to 4 sleepy servants and a dog that is not supposed to be in the chapel. He does not chase the dog out. It is Michaelmas Eve, and the dog is quiet, and God, the chaplain privately suspects, has seen dogs before. Michaelmas morning comes up gold and cold. Below the castle, at the foot of the hill, there is a village, one street, a pond, a mill by the stream, and a small stone church whose bell is the loudest thing that most of these people will ever hear. The castle and the village are one creature, really. The village grows the food, the castle eats it, and guards the valley in return. Neither would last a season without the other. First, though, Mass, because a feast is a feast of the church before it is anything else. The whole village files in under the bell, smelling of soap and Sunday wool, to hear the story of the archangel who threw the dragon out of heaven, Michael, the soldier saint, captain of the harvest-tide sky. Even the fighting in this world's imagination has a season, and it is now when the barns are worth defending. Then the business begins. Today the village pays its rents. All morning there is a line at the manor office, men in their best tunics with pennies knotted into cloths or driving a goose or two ahead of them because rent can be paid in geese, and at Michaelmas, with the stubble fields full of fat, gleaning geese, a goose is the traditional coin. Roast goose at Michaelmas was on its way to becoming a custom all across this country. Eat goose today, they would come to say, and you will not want for money all year. Watch one of these transactions all the way through because it is the whole social order in miniature. A tenant sets his pennies on the board, coins his family may have handled 100 times, counted at night, retied in their cloth. Walter's clerk counts them without hurry, finds them right, and cuts a notch in a hazel tally stick, which is then split down its length, 1/2 for the manor chest, 1 for the tenant's roof beam. 2 pieces of wood that remember the same fact and cannot be made to disagree. No signatures. Half the men in this line cannot write their names, and it does not matter in the least. The notch, the split grain of the wood, the witnesses at the board. That is the contract, and it is honored on both sides, year after year, by people who will never read a word about themselves. And today, the village chooses its reeve. The reeve is the man in the middle, a villager, chosen from among the villagers, who for one whole year will stand between his neighbors and the Lord. He organizes the plowing teams. He makes sure the Lord's fields are sown and reaped. He answers for every missing sheaf, and at next Michaelmas, it is his account that Walter will pick apart line by line. It is an honor almost nobody wants. This year the lot falls on a broad, quiet man named Hugh, who takes it the way you take rain in this country, with a shrug, because complaining will not change the weather. By afternoon the geese are eaten and the rents are counted, and the old year, is over. In the fields below, the stubble stands pale and cut, and rooks walk in it like small deliberate monks. And now the whole country tilts toward winter, and everything that happens next happens in that tilt. This is the rhythm you should settle into now, a feast and then quiet weeks, another feast, another door and more quiet weeks. Nothing here will startle you, the year knows its way. On the wall that evening, the watchman Reese pulls his cloak tighter and notices what watchmen notice first every year, that his breath has become visible again. Below him, one window of the hall glows honey-colored in the dusk. Winter is 6 weeks away. The castle can smell it coming. Sleep is allowed to come and get you now, by the way. That was always the arrangement. This year we spend together. The castle will still be here in the morning. It has had a great deal of practice at that. October, in this corner of the world, smells of apples. The marches are cider country, and these are cider weeks. In the orchard below the walls, men shake the trees and the fruit comes down in soft green thunder, and at the press, a patient horse walks in a circle all day, turning the great stone that crushes the apples to pulp. The juice runs cloudy and sweet into the vats, and the whole yard hums with wasps too happy to sting. Cider appears in the household roles of this age alongside ale and wine, one more thing the land gives that the clerks write down. By Christmas, it will have quieted and cleared. For now it is just sweetness, going into barrels, going into the dark. Up in the coppice woods, October has its own quiet industry. Charcoal burners are at work. The bishop's roll pays them by name for wood cut and charked in his own coppice, building their slow black domes of stacked billets, sealing them with turf, and then sitting beside them for days, because a charcoal heap must smoulder without ever being allowed to burn, and the difference between the two is a man watching. At night, you can see the faint red seams of the mounds breathing on the dark hillside, and smell that bittersweet char that means winter fuel being born. Closer in, the meadows by the stream are being mown of a different crop, rushes. Cartloads of cool green rushes, cut and dried, because every decent floor in the castle, hall, chambers, chapel, is deep in strewn rushes that must be renewed before the great feasts, sometimes strewn fresh over sweet herbs, so that a well-kept room in this age smells green when you walk across it. When you imagine the hall now, put that under your feet. Not bare cold stone, but a soft, rustling, hay-scented floor that whispers at every step. In the fields, the year's first great work is already underway, the autumn ploughing. 8 oxen to a plough team, leaning into the yokes, turning the stubble under in long, dark ribbons, and behind them, a man broadcasting the winter wheat with a swing of the arm older than any kingdom. The seed goes into the cold ground now, on purpose. It will sleep under the snow, and it will be standing green when everything else has only just woken. Most of a farmer's cleverness is simply knowing what to trust to the dark. And up in the oak woods on the ridge, all through these weeks, you can hear pigs. This is pannage, the old autumn rite to drive the village pigs into the Lord's woods to eat their fill of fallen acorns. The swineherd lives up there with them half the season under a lean-to of branches, while his charges gorge themselves into perfect roundness among the roots. The pigs are very content. It is best, perhaps, that pigs cannot read a calendar. Because the door the year is walking toward now is Michaelmas, the feast of Saint Martin, the 11th of November, and Michaelmas is the day of the slaughter. The Old English name for November said it plainly, Blót Monath, blood month. Here is the arithmetic that rules it. The grass has stopped growing. From now until April, every animal that stays alive must be fed from the barns, from hay and straw and precious grain that people could eat. A castle can carry its plough oxen through the winter, its breeding stock, its milk cows, the horses, the hounds. It cannot carry everything. And so around Michaelmas, every farm in Christendom makes the same quiet judgment, which animals will see the spring and which will become the winter's food. It is not cruelty. It is a kind of housekeeping as old as winter itself, and there is even a mercy in its timing. The animals are at their fattest now, and the weather has finally turned cold enough to keep the meat. For 2 or 3 days, the castle courtyard becomes a workshop. The air smells of iron and wood smoke and scalded bristle. Great fires heat cauldrons of water. Men work in leather aprons with their sleeves rolled in the cold. And at the center of everything, like a treasure being spent, stands the salt. Salt is the whole secret. Meat is packed into barrels between thick layers of coarse gray salt, layer on layer, until the barrel is a solid cold library of the year's herd. Hams and flitches of bacon are rubbed with salt and hung in the wide chimney of the kitchen, where the smoke will cure them slowly into winter's most reliable comfort. And salt is precious enough that even great households run short. The Bishop of Hereford's roll, our neighbour, just down the marches, records his people borrowing half a seam of salt from the Templars at a nearby manor, the way you might borrow flour from the house next door. A bishop borrowing salt. Write that down, John, the clerk did. Salt borrowed from the Knights of the Temple. It was paid back. Salt debts were always paid back. Nothing is wasted. That has to be said plainly, because waste is a luxury this world has not yet invented. The blood goes into puddings. The fat is rendered down for tallow. Remember tallow. We will meet it again when we talk about light. The bristles go to the brushmaker, the hides to the tanner down the valley, whose yard everyone smells and no one visits. Bones to the stockpot, then to the dogs, and what even the dogs are done with is saved. And in June, on a hilltop, you will find out what this country does with old bones, and the answer is stranger and lovelier than you think. By the middle of November, it is done. The barrels stand ranked in the cellar like a silent congregation. The chimney is full of hams. The pigs are back from the woods, most of them. The castle has become what a castle really is, under all the towers and banners, a great stone larder defending its winter. Michaelmas is also, for the great households of this age, moving season. A lord with several manors does not sit in one of them and let the others rot. The household migrates with the calendar, eating its way politely from estate to estate. The bishops roll again. At Michaelmas, his whole house packs up and moves, carts groaning with the chapel silver, the featherbeds, the account rolls, the kitchen, and settles at the next manor until Christmas moves it again. And listen to the two things the roll says they did before the household arrived. They sent the baker on ahead so that there would be fresh bread waiting when the carts rolled in, and they had the manor house whitewashed. Whitewashed, hold on to that word, because it quietly demolishes one of the most stubborn pictures in your head. The gloomy medieval castle, all bare grey stone and dripping shadows. That castle exists mainly in films. Real castles were painted. Inside, and often outside too, the walls were coated in fresh lime whitewash, bright as a new shirt, and over the white they painted color. Red lines ruled to look like fine masonry, flowers, patterns, whole stories on the walls of the great chambers. The tower of London's Great Keep is called the White Tower for exactly this reason. It wore whitewash. When this castle's lord comes home for Christmas, he will come home to walls the color of cream, smelling faintly of lime, with firelight moving warm across them. Remember that picture. It is the truer one. The nights are long now, and getting longer, and the castle starts going to bed with the sun to save its light. But before we let it sleep, look down the valley once more. In the village, every cottage has its own small Michaelmas. One pig, perhaps killed and salted, a rack of dark meat drying in the roof smoke, a winter's insurance hanging from the rafters. The animals that will live sleep closer to the house now, sometimes at one end of the same long room, breathing their warm hay breath into the dark, a wall of gentle heat between the family and the weather. People and animals keeping each other alive by proximity. That is November in the year 1290-something. And in the long evenings between the feast days, because remember, that is how this year mostly passes, quiet weeks between doors, the indoor work begins. This is the spinning season. In every cottage and in the castle's own chambers, the women take up the distaff and spindle, and the thread grows by firelight, hour after hour, all winter long. The endless, patient, half-conscious work that clothes an entire civilization. A woman of this age spins the way she breathes, walking, talking, minding the pot, so much so that her whole side of the human family will be called the distaff side for centuries after the spinning stops. The men mend harness, whittle spoons and pegs, plait straw. Someone tells a story. Someone is always telling a story, and it is a long one, and nobody minds that they have heard it before, because the point of a winter story is not the ending. The point is that it lasts. Outside, the first hard frosts ring the valley in iron. A fox barks somewhere up the ridge. that short, lonely sound like a door in the cold. The watchdog answers once, out of principle, and goes back to sleep by the gate. The valley pulls its smoke blankets over itself, roof by roof. Let it. December in the marches is a country of early dark. At midwinter this far north, the sun rises after 8 in the morning and is gone again before 4 in the afternoon. 16 hours of night out of every 24. Whatever you imagine when you imagine the Middle Ages, imagine that first. Not battles, not banquets, but darkness, vast and regular and simply lived in, 16 hours at a stretch. This is Advent, 4 weeks of fasting before the feast. The kitchen goes quiet and fishy, salt herring, dried cod, eels from the mill pond, no meat at all. The castle tightens its belt on purpose, the way you hold your breath before diving. Half the pleasure of Christmas, the cooks will tell you, is the 4 plain weeks in front of it. And then, a few days before the feast, the whole shape of the castle changes, because the Lord comes home. You hear it before you see it. Horses, many horses, and cartwheels and dogs and voices in the road. The Lord, the lady, their children, their chaplain, their clerks, their grooms, their hawks, their hounds, their guests servants. A castle household is not a fixed thing, it is an accordion. That surviving great lady's role shows it plainly. In the daily head counts her clerk wrote down, 320 souls fed one day, 190 a few days later, when part of the family rode away. And on the day the Lord arrived with his following, nearly 700. 700 people, where last week there were 80. The castle does not just welcome the Lord home, it inflates around him. For 2 days the courtyard is a landed shipwreck of baggage. Great households travel with their world in carts, the chapel's silver and vestments in iron-bound chests, the feather beds and hangings for the family's chambers, the kitchen's copper, the rolls and the strongbox, whole beds broken down into numbered timbers. The castle's own furniture is sparse on purpose, trestles, boards, benches, because rooms in this age are stages, dressed when the players arrive. By the second evening, the bare chambers have bloomed, hangings on the walls, fires in every hearth that has stood cold since summer, and the whole keep smells of beeswax, wood smoke, and horses. The lady goes straight to the still room, and the linen presses with the housekeeper, taking inventory by candlelight. The Lord goes straight to Walter and the rolls. Each of them will tell you the other one got the easier audit. Every bed sprouts a second occupant, every bench becomes a bed. The great hall at night is suddenly a field of sleepers again. Servants and travelers rolled in cloaks on the rush-strewn floor, close-backed as loaves, the banked fire breathing over them. If you woke at midnight in that hall, you would hear a whole weather system of human sleep, snores and sighs, and someone talking softly to a person who is not there. The kitchen, meanwhile, has entered its finest hour. For 12 days, from Christmas to Epiphany, almost no one in this whole country works. The plough stands idle by law and custom both. The year's darkest days are simply handed over to rest and eating, 12 days of it. We know what a great march is tables served at Christmas, because the bishop's roll wrote one down: boar, partridges, beef, goose, venison from the Lord's own deer, sweet dishes after, and a spiced wine they called clary, warm with honey and pepper, going around in cups that never quite reach the bottom. The boar's head comes into the hall the way a small king would, carried high on its platter, and the whole company stands for it. Kings themselves did all this too, only more so. One Christmas earlier in the century, the royal household ordered 40 salmon for the feast, and as many lampreys, as the clerk put it, as could be found. And everywhere on the high table, glowing in the candlelight like wealth made edible, spice, pepper, cinnamon, ginger, saffron, sugar and almonds and figs, listed in the account rolls with the reverence other pages give to horses. Here, by the way, dies another myth. and it deserves to die at a feast. You may have heard that medieval cooks drowned their food in spices to hide the taste of rotting meat. Think about it for one honest moment. The people who could afford pepper, carried by ship and camel from the far side of the known world, worth more per pound than the meat many times over, were precisely the people who could afford the freshest meat in the country, walked to their own kitchen door on its own four legs. Nobody gilds rot. Spice was never camouflage. It was jewelry for food, status, warmth, and delight in a cold white season that badly needed all three. If the household holds a guest of true rank this season, the kitchen climbs even higher. The roles of the great houses show what was set before princes. Whale and sturgeon, the royal fish themselves, brought in barrels at fabulous expense. That countess whose accounts we keep opening bought an entire porpoise for her own table, and whale and sturgeon for a king's brother who was lodged, splendidly and inconveniently, under her roof. He happened to be her prisoner that particular year. The wars of the barons were like that, but a king's brother eats like a king's brother, whichever side of the door holds the key. Hospitality, in this world, is rank made visible, and the menu is the measure. At the low end of the hall, the villagers are here too. Custom brings them up the hill during the 12 days to eat at the Lord's table, their own bread and ale, and a share of the meat, under the same roof beams as the family, with the same fire on all their faces. For a few evenings in the dead of winter, the whole valley sits in one room. And the feast leaks past the walls deliberately. These are the days of largest alms, broken meats and whole loaves carried down to the gate, where the almoner knows every face in the crowd by name. The rolls make it official, one spring day, that same countess's clerk recorded 3/4 of an ox given over to the poor and the servants at a stroke. Charity here is not an afterthought of the feast, it is one of the courses. A great Yule log burns in the hearth, chosen months ago, dried all autumn, meant to burn through the whole 12 days if the fire is tended kindly. Someone is singing, someone is always singing. By this hour, the clary sees to it. It is not very good singing, it does not need to be. Outside, the 16-hour night stands around the castle, like a black sea around one lit ship. And the castle rides it, window by golden window, all the way to Epiphany. The 12 days have their own soft anarchy too. Games in the hall every night, blind man's buff, hot cockles, forfeits, dice on the lower boards where the chaplain pretends not to see, carols, which in this age are not solemn things but ring dances, sung and stepped at once, snaking between the trestles. In many great houses the world is turned gently upside down for the season. A boy bishop, a lord of misrule, servants sourced at the lords, and the lords required to laugh. 12 nights of it, ending at Epiphany with the coming of the kings to the crib, and on the eve, in the orchards, men carry ale out to the apple trees and drink to them, wassail, singing to the bare branches, so they will bear well in the year to come. Toasting your own trees in the snow by torchlight. There are worse religions. Then the guests trickle away down the winter roads, the hall exhales, the accordion folds itself small again. The Lord's household may ride on to keep Candlemas at another manor, as the bishops did, leaving Walter and Mardog and the skeleton house to mind the walls. The barrels in the cellar are counted again. The days are 1 minute longer, then 2. January passes almost without event, which is its whole character. The deep frost mornings when the well rope is stiff as a poker and the smith's hammers ring twice, once from the forge, once off the hillside. The thaw days when the whole castle drips and the courtyard is a small brown sea and everyone tracks mud into the hall and the rushes earn their keep. Plough Monday comes just after Epiphany, when the plough is blessed and hauled around the village to mark the working year's slow restart, though the ground itself will not be ready for weeks, and everyone knows it, and the ceremony is really a promise made to patience. Nobody notices yet, but the year has already turned its face. The 2nd of February, Candlemas, the feast of lights set down in the coldest shelf of the year. On this day the church blesses its candles, the whole year's supply carried in procession, every hand holding a small flame, the church door open to the snow and a river of little lights going in. Winter is half spent, the old saying runs. If Candlemas be fair and bright, winter will have another flight, half spent and the other half still to get through. So this is the right night to talk about light, because nothing separates that world from yours more completely than what happens after sunset. Light in this castle is money that burns. At the top of the hierarchy is beeswax. Candles of true wax burn clean and steady and smell faintly of honey, and they are aristocrats. The chapel has them, the Lord's table has them, and almost no one else. The great lady's roll counted them the way you would count coin. In one 12-day stretch her household burned 13 pounds of wax, and her chapel 3.5 more pounds of wax, weighed and logged. When Walter writes wax in his roll, he writes it carefully. Below wax comes tallow, candles of rendered animal fat, at a penny or two the pound. They work. They also smoke, gutter, drip, and smell of exactly what they are. A room lit by tallow is a room you can find with your nose. This is the workaday light of the household, doled out end to end. And below tallow, in the cottages down the hill, there is the rushlight, a peeled marsh rush, dipped in bacon grease, held in an iron pinch. It gives a bead of flame that lives perhaps a quarter of an hour. An evening's light for a family, for almost nothing. You gather the rushes yourself in summer, and the fat is skimmed from your own pot. The poorest light in the world, and one of the most patiently made. Now here is the thing the films never show you, and it is better than what they show you instead. You have seen the movie Castle, torches blazing in iron brackets down every corridor, all night, wall after wall of roaring pitch. Real accounts, real rolls, real kitchens tell a different story. There is no torch budget in the rolls. There is a candle budget. Torches were for occasions, a procession, an arrival at the gate, work that could not wait. What the accounts show, purchase by careful purchase, is a world where light was spent like silver, one flame at a time, in the one room where the household actually was. Everywhere else, the castle at night was dark, deliberately, economically, peacefully dark. People walked their own corridors by memory and moonlight and one shielded flame. They went to bed soon after the fire was banked, because staying up cost tallow. The darkness was not a failure of the Middle Ages. It was a budget, balanced every evening, and they were so at home in it that they gave the hours of the dark their own names and prayers. Walk it once so you believe it. Leave the hall after Compline with no candle. They are counted, remember, and cross to the stair. Your feet know the 6 steps down to the courtyard door better than your eyes ever did. Outside, the snow gives back enough starlight to shape the well, the woodpile, the chapel gable. A cat paws itself along the kitchen wall, on business of its own. In the stables, a horse shifts its weight in its sleep, a sound like a great soft drum. You are walking through a working fortress in total darkness, and there is nothing to fear in it at all. Every living thing in this enclosure is known, named, and mostly asleep. Up on the wall, Reese is doing the same thing at a higher altitude, making his slow round between the towers with his cloak drawn up over his mouth. A watchman's real enemies, in the long peace of these years, are cold and sleep, and of the two, sleep is the one that gets men dismissed. He walks to stay warm, counts his paces to stay awake, and marks the little hours by the wheeling of the stars, which is a thing every night worker in this world can do the way you read a clock face. In the chambers, the household is putting itself to bed in layers, like the barrels in the cellar. The Lord's family behind their bed curtains. A great bed is a room within a room, curtained against the cold, the warmest architecture in the castle. Their body servants on truckle beds that slide out from underneath, and arms reach away. The steward and chaplain in their own small chambers, luxurious in nothing but privacy. And everyone else, as you saw at Christmas, in the hall, around the banked hearth, in the deep rush floor, rolled in cloaks, arranged by rank even now, even horizontal, even asleep. Listen, from the church below, faint through the snow, the evening bell. That bell has a name you know. Curfew. It is not a punishment, the word is just Old French couvre-feu, cover the fire. When it rings, every hearth in the village is raked and banked, and the embers are hooded for the night. And the hood is real. The curfew is also an object, a great domed lid of clay or iron, pierced with holes, set down over the coals like a helmet. It keeps the fire slow, and the sparks in, and the thatch above 1,000 sleeping families unburnt. Under its lid, the fire dozes till morning without ever quite dying. At dawn, a kitchen boy will kneel, lift the hood, breathe on the grey heap, and the castle's fire, the same fire, opens one orange eye. There has been live fire in this kitchen, kept exactly this way, for as long as the walls have stood. Who keeps the fire? Everyone, in turn. That is very nearly the whole secret of getting a household through a winter. It would be dishonest to pretend February is cozy, so let us be honest in the gentlest way. By now the salt meat has become a fact of life, the way weather is a fact of life. The barrels are still sound, but the cellar is emptier than it was, and Walter goes down to count more often than he needs to, because counting is what steadies him. The whitewashed walls above the hearth wear their winter beard of soot. They will be lime-washed bright again when the household stirs in spring. Everyone's cloak smells of smoke. Everyone's boots are wet. Yet even February has its outdoor liturgy. On the still days, the men are out along the field edges, laying hedges, cutting the hawthorn stems half through and bending them down, weaving them along the line so they will grow into a living fence no bullock can argue with. A well-laid hedge outlives the man who lays it. In the coppices, the winter cut goes on, hazel and ash taken down to the stool, to spring again 7, 12, 20 rods at a time, wood grown like a crop, on a rotation longer than most lifetimes here, planted by men for the use of their grandsons. The smithy is the warmest workshop in the castle now, and knows it and hums with sociable repairs. Coulters to mend, chains, hinges, the year's ironwork put right before the ploughs go out. If you want to find anyone in February, look wherever there is a fire with a job attached to it. This is the low, quiet trough of the year, and the castle crosses it the way it does everything, slowly together, with bread and small ale and the fire kept in. Down in the village, the byre-end animals steam gently in the dark, and the family sleeps against that warmth, and under the snow, remember, the winter wheat is already alive. The candles are blessed. The days lengthen minute by counted minute. Sleep now if you have not already. February asks nothing of you. It only wants to be gotten through, and it is very good at being gotten through. March comes in with mud and wind and work. The oxen are out again, dragging the plough through fields that suck at every hoof, gulls crying and wheeling behind the share for the worms it turns up. The spring sowing goes in, barley, oats, peas and beans, everything the autumn did not dare to plant. In the lambing folds, the shepherds are sleeping out in little wheeled huts now, because the ewes have begun to drop their lambs into the cold, one wet miracle at a time, and a shepherd's whole year is judged by these few weeks. And over all of it lies Lent, the 40 days. No meat, no eggs, no cheese in the strict houses. From Ash Wednesday to Easter, the whole of Christendom eats fish, and when you add Lent to Advent, and to every ordinary Wednesday, Friday and Saturday of the year, it comes to something astonishing. Close to half the days of the year in this world were fish days. Half the calendar eaten from the water. So a castle is also a machine for finding fish. From the millpond and the moat and the stewponds, eels, pike, bream fresh and mostly for the Lord's table. From the sea by cart comes the true Lenten commissariat, white herring salted in barrels, red herring smoked to the color of saddle leather, salt salmon, and the king of the fast, stockfish, cod, split and dried in northern wind until it is hard as a board. It knocks like wood, it keeps for years. And before it can be eaten, it must be beaten soundly with a wooden mallet and then soaked until it consents to become food again. On Lenten mornings, you can hear the kitchen before you smell it, the flat, patient thump of the fish hammer, a sound like someone knocking on the door of spring over and over, asking it to open. The scale of it all still startles the accountants. A single fish day entry from a royal household of this age reads like a fleet's manifest: 93 cod, 16 salt salmon, 24 stockfish, eels and lampreys by the basket, for one day. The castle eats its herring and watches the fields green and counts. Because everyone is counting now, Lent is a held breath, and everyone in the valley knows exactly what day it lets go. One raw morning toward the end of the fast, you can watch the castle harvest its own water. The stew pond below the orchard is netted, 2 men wading thigh-deep and swearing devoutly, a third managing the dripping seine, and the pond yields up its cold silver, pike, bream, fat eels coiling in the baskets like questions. The best go into the kitchens holding tank to be eaten fresh at the Lord's table. A pond like this is a pantry that stocks itself, and castles are built next to good water for more reasons than drinking. Meanwhile, the whole castle is being spring-cleaned around you, because Easter is coming and the household wakes with the land. The winter's trodden rushes are forked out of the hall and carted off, taking a season of crumbs and dogs and dropped secrets with them. The floors breathe again under fresh green. The lime washers are at work too, brightening the smoke-dimmed walls back to white, painting out February. In the little walled garden, the first pot herbs are up, and the beehives, wax and honey, chapel and kitchen, are murmuring again in their straw skeps like an idea returning. Holy Week itself arrives strange and quiet. On the last days, the church bells fall silent altogether, the strangest sound in the year, a valley with its voice taken out, and the children run the lanes with wooden clappers instead, a dry rattling like the year clearing its throat. Easter morning, the bell does not ring so much as laugh. And now watch what a household roll can do, because for one Easter in these very years, on a manor just down these same marches, the bishop's clerk wrote the feast down item by item, and the list has survived 700 years. For a company of perhaps 70 guests, the kitchen took in 2.5 salted beef carcasses and 2 fresh, 5 pigs, 6 calves, 27 lambs, 2 boars, a live ox, a side of bacon, 12 fat capons, 3 plump deer, 148 pigeons, milk, cheese, some 60 gallons of wine, and 4,000 eggs. 4,000 for 70 people. It sounds like madness until you remember the arithmetic of Lent. For 40 days, no one has been allowed to eat an egg, but the hens never sign the fast. 6 weeks of eggs have been piling up in every larder in the parish, and Easter is the dam breaking. Eggs boiled, eggs baked, eggs in custards and pastries and sauces, eggs blessed in church, eggs given to children and servants and the poor. That is where your Easter egg comes from, not invented, released. Even kings played. That same Easter, the royal accounts show the king paying 18 pence to have 450 eggs covered in gold leaf to be handed out to his household. Gilded eggs from the king's own hand, 700 years before anyone wrapped one in foil. In the hall, the fires are built high. The first fresh meat since February comes up from the kitchen in a procession all its own. The new lambs stay out in the fold. Naturally, the 27 at the feast were bought in, and no one asks the shepherd his opinion of Easter. There is new milk again, and new cheese, and the sharp green taste of the first herbs. The whole valley has the pleasant dazed look of people who have eaten properly for the first time in 6 weeks. Spring is not coming anymore. It is here with egg on its chin. And the castle, which in February was a stone larder holding its breath, unclenches, quietly, gratefully, room by whitewashed room. May in the border country is almost embarrassing. After so many careful grey months, the valley simply pours itself out, hawthorn foaming white along every hedge, the oak woods hazing over green, larks going up out of the young wheat like sparks off a grindstone. The sheep stream up to the hill pastures with their lambs, and the dairy takes over from the cellar as the castle's beating heart. This is the white season: milk, curds, butter, cheese. The dairymaid becomes, for a few months, one of the most important officers in the whole establishment, and knows it. On May morning, the young people of the village are out before dawn, bringing home green branches and dew, and on the green, dancing. The castle pretends not to notice how many of its servants are yawning by noon. Some holidays enforce themselves. And in the week before Ascension come the Rogation days, when the parish walks its own edges. The whole village in procession behind the cross and the banners, priest, reeve, elders, children, beating the bounds. Along the stream, up the headlands, around the great oak that marks the corner where three holdings meet, stopping at each landmark for a gospel and a prayer over the young crops. The old men point out every boundary stone to the boys, and at certain corners, by long custom, a boy is bumped or ducked or given a clout, gently, formally, so that the exact line of the parish will be printed on his memory for the next 60 years. No map of this valley exists. The map is the procession, and it is redrawn every May in footsteps and small indignities, and it is more accurate than paper. But we are going to spend these soft weeks looking at something harder and much quieter, because spring is when the castle's other machinery turns fastest. Not the portcullis, the mill. Go down the hill and stand by the stream, where the great wheel turns in its perpetual argument with the water, and the whole building trembles gently, and the air is furred with flour. Every villager here is bound by a rule called suit of mill. Whatever grain your strips of field produce, you must grind it at the Lord's mill, this mill, and nowhere else. The miller takes his toll in kind, scooped out of your own sack. The multure, a fixed fraction of the grain, in some manners as much as 1 part in 16. There is no coin in it, no haggling, hardly even any words. Just a scoop, a level stroke of the hand, and the Lord's been a little fuller. The mill is a tax that runs on water. And it is enforced. Keep a hand quern at home, 2 humble stones for grinding your own flour, the way your great-grandmother did, and you are cheating the Lord of his multure. If the quern is found, it can be seized and broken. There were manors in this land where confiscated querns were paved into the courtyard, so that the tenants walked over their own defeat on the way to pay their toll. The same rule often held for the Lord's oven: your dough, his bakehouse, his fee. None of this is secret or even resented quite the way you would expect. It is simply the weather of the manor. The wheel turns, the toll is scooped, the flour comes home. But it is worth standing here a moment, in the flour dust and the noise, to understand what a castle is when it is not being a fortress. It is a landlord. The tallest tower on the hill and the patient wheel in the stream are 2 ends of one instrument. Which brings us, conveniently, to court day. 3 or 4 times a year the great hall becomes a courtroom, the hall moat, the manor court, with the steward presiding and the whole village obliged to attend. Do not imagine anything grim. The business of a manor court is the business of a village that has lived too close together for too long, written down by a clerk who has heard it all before. Strayed cattle in the young wheat, 2d. A blocked ditch ordered cleared. 2 neighbours find a penny each for a quarrel of words by the well. Brewing ale against the assize, which is to say, watering it, the usual suspects, the usual pennies. An heir pays a fine to take up his dead father's land. A daughter's marriage is licensed. The village's pledges stand up 2 by 2 to vouch for each other, as they have since anyone can remember. Even the mighty pay here in their way. The bishop's own roll, 1 line among the horse fodder, compensation paid to a man of Busbury whose pig was killed by his lordship's hounds, the greatest household on this stretch of the border, and a villager's pig, and the law quietly making them square. The clerk did not even underline it. The court rises, the fines dribble into Walter's roll. The evening is long and pale gold now, and nobody needs a candle till nearly bedtime, which improves everyone's temper, including Walter's. Step into the dairy before we leave the green months, because it is the pleasantest room in the castle right now, thick-walled, north-facing, cool as a cellar and white as Candlemas. The milk comes up from the meadows twice a day in wooden pails, and the dairymaid turns it, with rennet and patience, into the winter's cheese, curds cut and pressed in their cloths, wheels salted and set to sleep on the shelves like pale moons in a row. A hard cheese made in May will be at its best when the snow flies. Even the dairy, you see, is a kind of account roll. Some are written down to be read aloud in January. And down the great river to the east, the castle's one true luxury is making its slow way home. Wine. No vine worth the name grows on these hills. The lords of the marches drink Gascony, shipped into Bristol, and the bishop's roll shows exactly how it travelled next. 5 tons of red bought at once, over £10 worth, and carried up the Severn by barge. Watch it come, the broad flat boat leaning up the current, the towing men on the bank, the great hooped tons riding like patient cattle. It will take days. Wine in this country arrives at the speed of a river walking backwards and is honored accordingly when it gets here. One more spring creature before the summer comes. On the road below, pushing along at that steady half-trot that eats a county a day, there goes a messenger. The winter roads kept everyone home. The dry season opens the world again, and the letters begin to move, summonses, rents, gossip, love, law. Great households kept their own runners and riders, and the rolls preserve their names, and the names are perfect. The countess whose accounts we keep visiting employed messengers called Slingaway and Go be hest, sling away, go by the hest, go quickly at your command. Men named like arrows. The roll records Slingaway being sent out at high summer, in the year of the Great War, carrying word to the Earl himself. And history knows what was waiting at the end of that summer, even if Slingaway, trotting through the dust with his letters, did not. But that is another valley's story, and a louder one than ours. Our road only carries the ordinary post of a quiet year, a request for wine, a dispute about a ditch, a letter announcing guests for Whitsun. Whitsun comes, the third of the great hinges, 7 weeks after Easter, the church in its red vestments and the green world at its absolute height. And beyond it, at the bottom of the longest evenings of the year, midsummer is waiting with its fires. June is the month the castle harvests things that are not grain. First the sheep come down off the hills to be washed and shorn, protesting all the way, and leave again looking scandalized and small. Shearing is a festival with work hidden inside it, the fastest hands in the valley kneeling in the fleece-sweet dust, the click and slide of the blades, each fleece rolled and thrown in one motion onto the growing cloud in the wool loft. And that cloud is money. English wool in these decades is the best in the known world, and everyone knows it. The fortunes of Flemish weaving towns and Italian banking houses stand on backs like these. Merchants, agents ride out even to middling manors like ours, feeling the staple, arguing the price by the sack, paying sometimes a year in advance. When the wool train finally creaks off down the valley, great sacks the size of oxen, 2 to a cart, it carries the castle's most valuable export of the entire year. The wheat feeds the household. The wool pays for the wine, the spice, the wax, the law. A castle in this country floats, more than anything else, on sheep. Then the hay, lines of mowers moving through the meadow grass in a slow unison older than music, the swish of scythes, the whetstones ringing, the cut swathes lying in ranks to dry. Hay is next winter's heartbeat, every animal's life from Martinmas to April, and everyone knows it. And so for a week, the whole valley smells of cut grass and mild anxiety, watching the sky for rain. And then, on the 23rd of June, the work stops early, because tonight is the eve of St. John, Midsummer's Eve, and tonight, this whole country lights fires. On the hills as the light finally goes, and it goes so late now, past 9, the sky green gold in the northwest, you see them kindle, one by one, points of orange on the high ground, answering each other across the valleys as far as the eye can carry. We even have a local guide to what is burning. A canon of Lilshall Abbey, up the marches in Shropshire, set down the kinds of midsummer fire in plain words. There is the fire of clean bones, he says, with no wood in it, and that one is called a bone fire. There is the fire of clean wood, the wakefire, that men sit and wake beside. And the third is made of both, bones and wood together, and that is St. John's fire. A fire of bones. Say the canon's phrase quickly, and you will hear what became of it. Bone fire, bonfire. Every bonfire you have ever stood beside has a little of the march's midsummer in its name. Why bones? The old smoke was medicine, people said. Bone smoke rolling low across the crops, and the folds drives off blight and harm, so the fires are set thoughtfully upwind, where the drift will do the fields most good. Around the wake fires there is ale and singing, and the gathering of St. John's wort at the night's magical low tide. The young leap the embers when the flames sink, for luck, for love, because their knees still let them. The castle keeps the vigil in its own fashion. A fire on the green below the walls, the household drifting down to it after supper, Mardog holding forth about the fires of his boyhood, which were, of course, taller. And up on the wall, above it all, Rhys has the watch. So let us climb up and stand with him a while and settle, at last, the question of the garrison, because tonight you can count this castle's entire military strength from where you stand, and you will not need your second hand for long. Forget the films again, the battlements bristling with helmets, shoulder to shoulder, night after night. That is what a siege looks like, and a siege is to a castle what a fire is to a house, the great exception, prepared for always, happening almost never. Even the king's brand new fortresses in conquered Wales, the greatest castle works of this age, perhaps of any age, were garrisoned in peace by numbers that sound like a clerical error. 30 men. That was the establishment set for one of the mightiest of them, 30, of whom 15 were crossbowmen, and the rest, as the ordinance itself says, to be made porters, watchmen, and other keepers of the castle. Alongside them, a chaplain, a smith, a carpenter, a mason. The garrison of a world-famous fortress, one long dinner table. A private baron's castle, in a quiet year, keeps fewer still, likely just the constable, the porter, a watchman or two, and household servants who can hold a spear if the world goes mad. On an ordinary Tuesday night in June, the wall you are standing on is defended by approximately 5 men, most of whom are thinking about hay. This is the true secret of castles, and it is a gentle one. A castle is not a barracks that sometimes stores food. It is a farm office, a larder, a courtroom, and a family home, wearing armor it almost never needs, walls so good that they do their work simply by existing, year after year, in the corner of every traveler's eye. The shortest night barely bothers to get dark. By the time Rhys hands over the watch, there is already grey light behind the eastern hills, and the last bone fires are settling into their ash. Stay up here a moment after he goes down the stair. This is the shortest night of the year, and it is worth being awake inside it once. The valley lies open under sky that never quite finishes darkening, a deep sea green in the north where the sun is only hiding, not gone. You can smell hay and the cold coming off the stream and the last sweet smoke of the fires. Somewhere down in the village, a dog rose hedge is blooming so hard you can smell that too. 700 years from now, on this same night, the same short darkness will stand over this same valley, and it will smell, allowing for everything remarkably similar. Nights are the oldest things we have. St. John's Day dawns smelling of smoke and hay. Midsummer, the top of the year's arch. From here, though no one says it aloud, every evening comes a little sooner, the long, slow, golden slide down toward harvest and Lammas and the closing of our circle. But there is one more high season to spend first, and it is the one the whole year was for. By late July, the valley has changed color. The wheat that went into the cold ground back in October, the seed we trusted to the dark, if you remember, stands shoulder-high and heavy-headed, turning from green to that deep-worked gold that means the waiting is nearly over. The whole manor tips toward it. Sickles come down from the rafters to be ground bright. The smith's wheel sings all day. Walter walks the field edges with Hugh the reeve, rubbing ears of grain between his palms, blowing the chaff off, tasting. The talk in the village is of nothing else. Too much rain now, or a flattening wind, and the winter after next Michaelmas becomes a hungry one. Everyone here has lived through one of those, and nobody talks about it, and everybody remembers it. Then comes the 1st of August, Lammas. The name says everything, loafmas. The first ripe corner of the first field is cut early, threshed in a hurry, ground and baked, and that loaf, the first bread of the new harvest, is carried to the church and blessed at the altar. The year's first mouthful of the future, presented formally to God before anyone else gets a bite. It is the oldest kind of prayer, gratitude offered slightly in advance just to be safe. And with the loaf blessed, the harvest proper begins, the 6 hardest, brightest weeks of the whole medieval year. Everything else stops. Court days, building work, wars when kings can help it. The whole world drops what it is holding and picks up a sickle. On the Lord's own fields, the villagers owe their boon works, the extra harvest days that come with their land, when every household sends its reapers to bring the Lord's grain in before their own. It sounds harsh, and it is the deal their grandfathers made. But custom has sanded its edges smooth, because on boon days, the Lord feeds the workers, and the rolls show him doing it properly. Bread, cheese, ale, sometimes meat, served out in the field at noon, the one day of the year the ploughman and the pantry meet as almost equals. On some manors, these were merry days by contract, wet boons, with ale, and the reeve who skimped the beer would hear about it for a generation. The heat shimmers over the stubble. The reapers move in a staggered line, stooping and rising like slow oars. Behind them, the binders follow, and the stooks go up in ranks, and the loaded carts sway home through gates built wide for exactly this. And everyone is thirsty, which makes this field the right place to lay our last myth gently to rest. You have heard it. Medieval people drank ale morning to night because the water was too foul to touch. It is an exaggeration that would have puzzled them. This valley drinks from the spring above the mill and the well in the castle yard, and drinks gladly. Wells and clean springs were prized, protected, even blessed. And the first thing anyone asks of a castle site, before beauty, before stone, is good water, because a castle with a bad well is a castle already lost. What the harvesters are drinking out here is mostly small ale, brewed weak, barely stronger than the barley it came from. Not because water would kill them, but because small ale is bread you can pour, calories, salt sweat comfort, and safe-tasting refreshment that keeps, made at home from the field around you. Water for thirst, ale for work, wine for lords. It is not a horror story, it is just a menu. Behind the last cart, when each field is cleared, comes the year's gentlest procession. The gleaners, widows, children, the old, everyone the plough cannot use, walking the stubble bent double, gathering the dropped ears one by one into their aprons. Gleaning is a right, not a charity. The poor of the parish harvest the harvest's forgetfulness, and a sharp-eyed child can glean a family a week of bread. The reeve watches to see the reapers are not too careful. There is such a thing, in this world, as leaving well. Week by golden week, the barns fill. The great tithe barn down by the church swallows its tenth of everything, sheaf by counted sheaf, one sheaf in 10 to the church. Off the top, before rent, before seed, before anything. Its long roof is the biggest in the valley after the castle's own, which tells you the order of things around here as clearly as any sermon. The stubble spreads behind the reapers, and the geese move onto it like a slow white army of occupation, gleaning themselves fat for, well. You know by now what geese are gleaning themselves fat for. The year is a circle, and the goose is on it. Inside the barns, the year's last long sound begins, threshing. All autumn, all winter, when nothing else can be done, men will stand on these floors swinging flails, the steady doubled heartbeat of grain being persuaded out of straw, thump thump, thump thump, from now until nearly Candlemas. Then the wind ring on breezy days with the great doors open at both ends, grain and chaff tossed into the through draft, the wind keeping the one and taking the other. The barn doors of this country are built facing each other for exactly this reason. Even the architecture here is a tool with a season. On the last evening of harvest, custom crowns the work. The final standing corner of the final field is left till everyone can gather. The last sheaf is cut with a little ceremony, in some villages plaited and dressed, and carried home like a small queen of the year, and the last cart comes up the hill garlanded, at dusk, with the reapers riding the load and shouting the old shouts, and everyone who hears them in the valley smiles without deciding to. Then the harvest supper in the Lord's own barn, trestles down the threshing floor, lanterns hung from the tie beams, carefully mined in a barn full of straw, and the year's one meal where the whole manor eats together with the counting suspended. Beef and bacon and new bread, the first of the new ale, cheese from those May moons in the dairy. Hugh the Reeve is toasted, roughly. Walter is toasted, more cautiously. The oldest man present says what the oldest man present says every year, that this harvest was good, but nothing to the harvest of his youth. He said it last year, he will say it next year. It is as much a part of the feast as the bread. Outside the barn doors, the moon comes up huge and tea-colored over the stubble, the harvest moon, rising early and low, night after night, as if the sky itself were holding a lantern over the last of the carting. Then a morning comes when the wind has an edge it did not have last week. The light is lower. There are apples underfoot in the orchard again. You know this smell, wood smoke, wet grass, apples going soft. You have been here before. It is the last evening of September again, and you are standing on the same chalk road where we began, watching the same carts creak up to the same gate in the same failing light. A whole year has gone under us, feast by feast, like posts of a bridge. Michaelmas and the counting, Martinmas and the salt, the 12 days blazing in the black middle of winter, Candlemas and its budget of small flames, the long fish-grey patience of Lent and Easter breaking over it in a wave of eggs, the green months, the mill wheel turning its quiet arithmetic, the bonfires answering each other across the midsummer hills, the blessed loaf, the loaded carts. And now the door of Michaelmas again, and behind it, all of it, waiting to happen over in the same order to the same bells. Up in the castle, Walter has stitched the new parchment onto the roll and ruled his first clean line. Tomorrow Hugh will hand back the Reeves tally with visible relief, and some other quiet man will take it up with a shrug. The geese are at the gate. Rees has noticed his breath again on the wall. Nothing has changed, which is, if you think about it, the whole achievement. A year has been survived so thoroughly, so competently, that it looks from the outside like nothing happening. That was the real work of a castle, not the sieges, which came to most castles never, not the battles. Just this, the patient, unfamous, magnificent administration of winter after winter, grain into barns, salt into barrels, wax into ledgers, wood into ash, and every single evening, without exception, for 300 years, someone remembering to bank the fire and hood the coals so that tomorrow could be lit from tonight. Who keeps the fire? The porter at his gate, the boy who kneels at the grey hearth each dawn, the steward with his roll, the reeve with his tally, the shepherd out with the lambs in the March sleet, the woman salting the pig, the villagers filing up the hill through the snow of the 12 days to eat at one long table. All of them in turn, that is who, that was always who. It is full dark now. Mardog swings the great doors to, and you hear the oak bar drop home, a deep, unhurried, satisfied sound, the castle's own good night. Above the hall roof, the smoke stands straight up into the first frost-sharp stars. Down in the kitchen, the last waking servant rakes the embers together, sets the pierced hood over them, and goes to his pallet in the warm dark. Under its lid, the fire will doze till morning, the way it dozed through every night of the year we have spent here, through the goose fairs and the blood month, the Yule log and the blessed candles, the fish hammers and the bone fires and the harvest moon. The year is wound up and put away in its chest, like Walter's roll, with all its days written in. And the new one has already begun, quietly in its sleep. The winter wheat is in the ground again, under the cold, waiting, the way everything here waits, patiently in the dark, sure of the spring. The castle breathes slower now. Listen, the wind over the battlements, the pond settling, an owl trying the length of the valley. Let the last candle go. Sleep well, the gate is barred, the fire is kept, and the year knows its way.